My name is Bailey Albus, and I am the Youth and Family Program Specialist at the National World War II Museum. I just want to thank everyone for joining us, and we're going to talk about scrapbooking and storytelling today. So when we talk about history, one of the big parts of that is storytelling. We're telling stories about places, people, and things that have happened over time. And we all have our own personal histories and stories that we can share about. So we're going to explore two different ways that we can creatively share those experiences and stories. The first we're going to look at is actually writing stories. And then we're going to look at how we can have a physical product from that story through scrapbooking. So we will start with museum friend and author, Miss Kirby Larson. She will share with us her experience, how she became an author, and then how she researches and writes the stories that she writes. Kirby is known for writing historical fiction. So that means she takes events that have happened for real in history, and then she makes up a story to kind of fit into that. And all of her stories are based off of dogs and how they might fit into that. So without further ado, we're going to watch a short clip that features Miss Kirby Larson.
I was not always an adult. I was a kid once, just like you, asking many of the same questions you probably asked, like, what will I be when I grow up? And I had lots of different ideas for myself. I thought I might be a circus performer, but then I realized I am terrified of heights and could not be a trapeze, swing on the trapeze like I had dreamed about. So that wasn't going to work for me. I loved the Encyclopedia Brown books, so I thought about being a detective, but my mom said that would be too dangerous. And lots of girls my age ended up being nurses, but I faint at the sight of blood, so I was not a good candidate for a nurse. But ever since I learned to read, I loved reading and I loved books. And so I decided that maybe being a writer was the path for me. So I wrote a bunch of stories and I mailed them out. And I was so excited because I would be sitting at home, and this was in the old days when you actually got letters. And I was just waiting for the letter from the publisher. Those are the people who make your stories into books, telling me that they were going to turn my story into a book. And I was so excited until I got these letters, which are called rejection letters. And I actually stopped counting after about 250. These letters said basically, we do not like your stories and we don't want to make them into books. Now, of course, I was very depressed about that because I was so excited about being a writer. But I didn't realize I was making a really huge mistake in my excitement at finally figuring out what I wanted to do with my life. I was making the big mistake of sending out my first drafts. And as you're probably way smarter than me, you know that first drafts are never our best effort. But it took me a long time to figure that out. And what I have learned in my experience as a writer is that writers and dogs have a lot in common. And I happen to know that firsthand because about 9 years ago, this little dog named Winston B. Larson, he likes to dress up for Halloween, came into our home. Now, I had written 2 books with my good friend, Mary Nethery, about dogs, and though I'd never had a dog in my whole life, I decided I wanted to be owned by one. And so we got Winston, and he was so adorable, and then I realized I didn't know anything about dogs. And so the first thing I did was to sign up for an obedience class with Winston. And when we were in that class, the very first command that we were taught for the dog was sit. And then the second command we learned was stay. And it was then that I realized how much writers and dogs are alike. Because if a writer doesn't sit and stay in her office chair working on her stories until they just sparkle, she is never going to get a book published. And so when I finally figured that out, that first drafts weren't going to cut it and that I had to do my very best work, I began to get books published. And these are some of my books. I actually think my 29th book got published recently. So now I know that writing is like a job, and I am in my office every day. There's Winston helping me. It's, I show up every day. It's a job like your teachers or your parents go to work every day. Most of the time, I am working in my home office with Winston. But sometimes my books require me to do some research, and that research takes me to wonderful places like New Orleans. And sometimes I have to even make a huge sacrifice and eat the local food there. And you can bet that I enjoyed every single one of those beignets. What I love most about research trips, aside from the food, is that I get to go to really fascinating places like the National World War II Museum. And it was there, just on a chance visit, actually, the first time I went, that I learned about this man named Andrew Jackson Higgins. He owned a local company that built boats, and Mr. Higgins was very confident. He did not lack in self-confidence. And when the United States got into World War II, he called up the Navy and he said, I can build every boat you need to transport men and troops to land them on the beaches. And the Navy was like, oh, you're just small potatoes, little boatyard. There's no way you could do all that. And well, I'll tell you in a minute how that all turned out. So while I was at the museum, because I'm a researcher and a writer, the wonderful people there let me come in and dig around in their archives. And archives are collections of photos and documents that aren't on display. And though they were very generous to let me look through those, I did need to make an appointment ahead of time. I only had one day in the archives, and I could have spent a lot longer. But it was while I was digging around in the archives that I learned that Mr. Higgins did indeed end up building nearly every boat that the Navy used during the war. And in fact, General Eisenhower said that we won the war thanks to Mr. Higgins and his boats. And not only did he build all those boats, no matter what the Navy said, he threw a big party when he built his 10,000th boat. All of New Orleans turned out in July of 1944, and I love that detail so much that it actually ended up in my book. Now, I do a ton of research before I start any book. I don't want to go into a book with a preconceived notion of where it's going to go or what it's going to look like. So I was reading around, and imagine my surprise when I learned that many captured German soldiers were brought to the United States because there wasn't enough room to house them in prisoner of war camps in Europe. And I don't know where you're all watching from, but you can see that nearly every state in the Union housed a German prisoner of war camp. And imagine my greater surprise when I learned that some of those camps were in the city of New Orleans. This article talks about that there were hundreds of German prisoners in New Orleans. One place that prisoners of war were sent was a camp called Camp Plauche. And Camp Plauche was located directly across the canal from Higgins Boatyard. Can you imagine that? Enemy prisoners were a mere short swim away from a valuable wartime industry. It just boggled my mind. Now, precautions were taken when the Germans and some Italians were brought to the camps. They were given clothes painted with letters that I think you can see in the picture there. It says PW for prisoner of war. That was so they would be easy to identify. And the reason that was important was because so many men had gone off to the war that the country was in huge need of labor in the farms and in fields and doing road repairs and other assorted jobs. So the prisoners of war had to wear those identifying clothes so that when they were out working, it would be known that they were prisoners of war. And I gleaned this information from reading old newspapers and looking at old photographs. But I have a favorite writer's tool, and it is the question, what if? So I asked myself, what if you were a prisoner of war and you didn't want to be a prisoner of war anymore and you wanted to try to escape? What might you do to accomplish that? So first thing you'd have to do is get rid of the clothes, right? So I thought that maybe a prisoner of war might look to the farmer's old overalls to see if he might be able to snatch those up and put them on. And I bet you guys have great imaginations, and you could think of other ways that a prisoner of war might try to disguise himself to blend in and maybe sort of disappear when he was working in a field. Some of the prisoners of war were very young, maybe not as young as this kid, but they were 17 and 18 years old. And I learned that information by reading dozens of autobiographies by men who actually had been prisoners of war here in the States. Now, I could not imagine being a teenager captured by the enemy and sent far away from home. So I put that thought into the soup pot of my imagination and I let it simmer. Writing a book is a bit like assembling a puzzle. So now I had some basic puzzle pieces. I had Mr. Higgins and his boatyard. I had young German prisoners of war. Because of the series that I had been writing that started with Duke and then Dash, Liberty is the third book in this series, I knew that my main character, would be an 11-year-old. And in this case, I was pretty sure my 11-year-old would be a boy because I thought he would be more likely to actually meet up and interact with a German POW. I knew that he might meet that POW while the POW was away from the camp doing some kind of job. And I knew another puzzle piece was how I was going to get my main character, my 11-year-old main character, to meet Mr. Higgins, who was the inspiration for this entire book. And so I decided one way to do that would be to make my main character an inventor. And that is how he and Mr. Higgins would meet up. But then there was one more thing that I was thinking about, and that was something that kids born in the 1920s and 1930s really had to worry about. And it's something you don't have to worry about because a vaccine was discovered. But for kids born in the 20s and 30s, polio was a huge worry. Thousands and thousands of children were afflicted with it and suffered with it for the rest of their lives. Even our wartime president, Franklin Roosevelt, suffered from polio. And so did my very first writing teacher, a wonderful woman named Peg Carrot, and maybe you've read some of her books. So inspired by Peg and the fact that so many children would have been impacted by polio, I decided that my main character in Liberty, a character I named Michael, Fish is his nickname, Elliot, I decided Fish would be a polio survivor. And because of that, because Fish has a bad leg, he doesn't have very good self-esteem. He doesn't think very much of himself, and he is convinced that his father doesn't love him anymore because of his bad leg. But it turns out that there's something really special and unique about Fish, and that special quality enables him to save the dog you see in the picture, a stray named Liberty. He's the only one who could do that. Now, a lot of writers like to know what their human characters look like when they're writing about them. I don't have that feeling so much, but I love to know what my dog characters look like. And so I usually go on petfinder.com to look for a model for the dog that I'm writing about in the book. And so this dog was named Tess, and she was the model for Liberty when I was writing that book. So her photograph was next to my computer the entire time I was writing. Now, Fish is from Washington State, where I live, but he moves to New Orleans with his big sister Mo when she gets a job working for Mr. Higgins. And one reason I did that is because I wasn't raised in New Orleans. I didn't feel comfortable writing about it from the point of view of a native. And so I thought I could have Fish be where I'm from, and I could plunk him down in New Orleans. And so everything would be new to him. The sights and the smells, and he loves the different places like Pontchartrain Beach, which is where this couple is enjoying a lovely day. He enjoys snowballs and the Roman candy man. And I read so much about the Roman candy man. I found out that they still make Roman candy, and I ordered a bunch of it to taste test at home, and I must say it is delicious. There are so many bits of history, some lovely, fun bits of history I enjoyed sharing about New Orleans. But it was also important to share some other things that aren't so positive, like the cruel effects of segregation and the Jim Crow laws. And when you read Liberty, you'll read about Olympia, Fish's friend, having to sit at the back of the streetcars or having to use a certain restroom because she isn't white like Fish. My research revealed that sometimes whites and blacks even lived in the same neighborhood, but the kids would have to go to different schools. So I put Fish and his sister in one of those integrated neighborhoods, and I gave Fish that pesky younger neighbor named Olympia. Now, not that Fish had never seen people being discriminated against before, but he hadn't really experienced a friend of his experiencing discrimination. And there is a scene in the book that's based on something I actually read about, where Olympia is pushed off the sidewalk by an older white man, and Fish observes this, and he has to carry that around in his heart and really puzzles about how people can treat one another like that. So in a way, Liberty, the book, is like a big pot of gumbo. But my ingredients are Mr. Andrew Jackson Higgins, a boy named Fish suffering from polio, World War II, a stray dog, an American girl named Olympia, Jim Crow laws, and the wonderful city of New Orleans. So I hope when you read this book that you'll say I mixed up all these ingredients with some very tasty results.
Right. All right. Liberty sounds like a really fascinating book, and I hope everybody takes a chance to check it out and read more and find out how it ends. So as you can see, there's a lot that goes into creating a story, and whether that story is something that's completely made up or is from your own experiences, it does take some brainstorming and trying to figure out. So I'm going to share a quick worksheet with you all that you can use to get you started on brainstorming for your story. So we're going to look at 4 different elements when thinking about a story. And I'll remind you that this can be a story where it's maybe like how Kirby writes, where you take a historical thing that's really happened and then create a fictional story around that experience. Or it can be something that you've actually experienced firsthand and as a way that you want to retell that story to make it entertaining for other people. So we're going to look at characters, we're going to look at the setting, the problems that that character might encounter, and then how they solve those problems. And this is the basis of any story that you might read. So if we take Kirby's story as an example, she does a really good job of summarizing it at the end there. So her main character is Fish. And we know that Fish is an 11-year-old boy, that he is a survivor of polio, that he has a limp. So we can just make a bulleted list of all of these things. From there, we know that the setting is during World War II. So it'll be in the 1940s. And he lives in 2 different places. Remember, he moves from Washington State to New Orleans. And then from there, we can think about some of the problems that he encounters. Things like moving and having that struggle with polio. And then he's got a lot of internal problems because of that, self-esteem issues. He feels like his father doesn't love him. And then if we're thinking about his friendship with Olympia, segregation is a huge problem that he has to deal with. And of course, we don't know any of the solutions because we have not read the book, and I'm not going to give them away. So you'd have to read the book to figure out what those solutions are. But when you use this, you can create the foundation of your story and really use it as a jumping off point. This will be available. You can download it, print it out, and use it and create as many different stories as you'd like using this as your foundation. So like I said, we can tell our stories through a couple of different creative ways. Writing a story is one of those, and then another one could be scrapbooking. So scrapbooking is like a way to have a physical example of memories that you make. And scrapbooking was something that was really popular during World War II. I feel like it's also made kind of a resurgence during this time. And people are figuring out how to put those memories that they're making and make it into a physical book. So I'm going to share with you one scrapbook that's pretty popular from our collection from a young man named Billy Michael. Now, Billy Michael was a 6-year-old boy during World War II, and he lived in the small town of Zimmerman in Louisiana. And when he was a young boy, the whole state set up a competition to see how much scrap students from different schools could collect. And even though he was in this teeny tiny town of Zimmerman, his school collected the most scrap in the entire state. And he as an individual collected a lot of scrap. So he was actually honored in New Orleans and got to experience the launch of the ship USS Leonidas Polk. So he was invited into the city and got to take an inspection tour of the city in a Jeep and then participate in the launch of this boat. And while he was doing that, his mother actually collected pictures and letters and different scraps to put into his scrapbook. This scrapbook is actually available on our website for our Get in the Scrap program, which is a great program for kids that are in 4th through 8th grade, and it has all kinds of fun interactive resources and activities. So I recommend y'all checking it out. So I'm going to share my screen with y'all one more time and show you this fun scrapbook from our collection from Billy Michael's experience during World War II. So here he is in front of his one-room school in his rural town of Zimmerman. And here he is with other students that were honored for the competition for the launch of the USS Leonidas Polk. Here's a letter from the governor of Louisiana congratulating him. A letter from the salvage committee in New York. And then the picture of him for the tour, the inspection tour of New Orleans, and finally a picture of the actual Leonidas Polk up close. All right, so that's just an example of what one scrapbook looks like. That's a pretty simple scrapbook. It just contains pictures and memories. So what we're going to think about is how we can create our own scrapbook or scrapbook pages. So you can use anything that you have available in your house. I have just a few recommendations that I pulled from my own home. I, of course, have some photographs from when I was younger. I have some cardstock, so a nice sturdy piece of paper that I can put these pictures on. And then I also have stickers. And finally, I have some glitter pens, so I can use it to decorate the pages. I can write captions. I can draw little pictures. It's just a way to make it a little bit more interesting. So these are just the supplies that I would be using. But my colleague and friend, Miss Gaynell, has been working on her own scrapbook project with her son, Ben. And she is now going to take over and share her product and process with us.
Okay, so, all right. Hello, everyone. So I'm Gaynell. This is my son, Benjamin. And we have been working on our own scrapbook projects here.
We have, this is the hard one in the lead world, and this is number world out here.
And you want to tell them about this one?
These are star world, these are number world.
Stars and numbers. What did you call this one?
This is icing.
So these are all the things that you like. So Ben and I made this scrapbook page about all of Benjamin's favorite snacks and things that we could easily find right now. So right now, because of the pandemic, it's kind of hard to find some things.
And I got this.
Yes, what's that one?
This is the lead word and heart word.
Yes. So we use construction paper, and this is just a plain leaf that we just copied off of our printer here and printed it out. And Ben colored it with multiple colors. And we found some stickers like Bailey recommended, and we got them from the store. And our bear, Teeny Bear, here to keep us company. And so these are silver sheets. And then another thing that Ben and I are also working on today.
I have a blue star sticker and a green star sticker.
Yes. we found a way to make a little pocket. So if we wanted to write a letter and make it out to our future selves, we could put it inside of this little pocket, along with some other photos and clippings from the weekly ads that are in like the stores, in your local newspaper, things that we can find easily around the house. So this is a way for us to kind of like create memories, so when Ben is a lot older, Benjamin will be able to remember like what his life was like at this time. I made sure to add Ben's name and the date at the bottom of his horn of his event. Defrost. And so Ben has also been doing a lot of freestyle drawing. So I would just assemble all of this into one little booklet. These are just the standard 12 by 12 scrapbook sheets that I picked up from Walmart in a little pack.
Purple spot and orange spot.
Yes.
And
And
then
then
the face, the orange face.
he has an orange face. Why does he have an orange face?
That is what I draw in there.
Oh, and what is it?
These are his legs,
Mm-hmm.
and that is his sticky hair, but that is a puppy.
That is a puppy. Okay.
With the puppy.
So that is pretty much what Benny and I have for today, and we thank you for spending some time with us this morning. I'm sure Ben and I will be working on these over the next few hours. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Gaynell. That's an awesome idea. I love that you've added the envelope so that you can write a letter to your future self. And I just want to point out that we did have one person thank Ben for presenting. I think Ben is probably our youngest presenter here on our webinars. So thank you guys so much for sharing. Again, thank you all for tuning in and joining us for today's webinar. I encourage you to continue to tune in over the next few weeks. We have lots of ways to bring World War II into your homes and continue to engage with us. Thank you, everyone, and I hope you all enjoy your weekend. Bye.